Walt, welcome back from your winter break. I hope you had a nice, relaxing time. I did the one thing I never did. I relaxed, and we're back here on Autonomy Markets. And to the listeners and viewers, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And thanks for all the great feedback you gave Walt and I last year. Look forward to producing more great episodes with you this year. Next week, you and I will be at CES. If you're there, come say hi to Walt and I. I'll be the colorful guy. Walt will be the tall guy. It's not twins with Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it will be fun. But well, let's start with the big news. When you were relaxing, the lights went out in San Francisco, and Waymo's, no pun intended, came to a grinding halt in intersections on the roads. What do you make of all that?
First of all, there's obviously no surprise that the lights go out. The infrastructure, the power infrastructure in our country, regardless of what the city is challenged. Obviously, this is the exact thing that we talk about in terms of Waymo and Tesla and others. Scaling is the challenge of just getting more power to charge all these EVs that are out there. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise was that these hundreds of Waymo cars in that market just basically stopped in place and turned their emergency flashers on. Very surprising. And what was more surprising to me is, because things happen, as we know, as this product is moving forward, is like Waymo was just silent for multiple days. And I think it again goes back to something we've talked about in this podcast. You're run by engineers, right? It's very tech focused. Like, hey, we just make a good product, everything else will fall into place. And the PR is just very lacking. It took them multiple days to come back with some explanation, which was like a half-assed explanation, to be honest, in terms of what happened. They need to do a better job at getting in front of this thing as this product becomes more mainstream. So I think it's just a really disappointing response from what was a pretty big event. We can get into what exactly happened.
It's crisis management 101. The vehicles, no pun intended again, they played possum. and they just sat there. I did an interview with Axios about this. And the key takeaway from the interview I did with Axios was public trust. No response. You're eroding public trust at a time when public trust is absolutely crucial to scaling autonomous vehicles. And when an official statement came out, and I'll be rude, in PR speak, me reading between the lines, well, it looked a lot like they were blaming the cellular networks. You're Mr. Telco, sir, on Lightshed. You do Telco Corner. You've got a lot of telco relationships. What really happened? Was it truly cellular going down, or what was it?
Yeah, I mean, that's not the way I read their explanations. I don't want to put this on Waymo, but I did call the operators, and I'm obviously familiar with how the network works. There's power backup on these cell sites, whether it's battery or generators. So there was connectivity there. I think the issue when you read that, again, it was a very, I thought, weakly worded statement. They just be direct, tell people what happened. And I think when I read it, it sounded like, you have these remote drivers, which we've talked about before in the podcast, where as if the Waymo is driving and it's about to hit something that it doesn't quite understand, it goes to an external person that's sitting in front of a computer, and that person can click, do this or do that. Well, they had such an overwhelming flow of requests back to these remote drivers. It was understaffed, that seemed to be the issue. So the question is, like, this is also something they don't disclose. We don't know how many remote drivers there are per car. And maybe they're going to start getting asked questions for greater transparency. Do you need to allocate more humans as remote drivers that are there? The bigger question, though, the bigger issue, which is, because I think you and I would both agree that's not the solution, is how are the cars not even if there was no connectivity via the cellular networks, because that could certainly be a challenge that happens in the future. If there's no connectivity, how are the cars programmed not to just pull off to the side of the road in a safe location so you're not blocking an intersection where emergency vehicles might need to get through, during a power outage? I don't even understand. And why was there not a better explanation of saying, like, this is why that didn't happen and this is why it won't happen in the future? It was very generic wording. Just, again, a really poor job by the company at handling what was a pretty big PR event.
Waymo's PR is not very good. Let's look at the Toyota statement, one sentence. The one thing Waymo's PR is good, though, on announcing new cities. So I don't get this. They should be transparent with this to build trust. What is the current ratio of remote drivers to vehicles? What is the current intervention with remote drivers? Disclose that data, build trust. make it part of the Waymo safety benchmark data set, release it publicly, open source it on GitHub, and allow engineers to build on it. Because this whole incident in the response wall unfortunately raises more questions about how technologically far Waymo is ahead as it compares to competitors.
Actually, I don't even think that's the issue. I think the product is great. These things are going to happen. Just have better responses for it, and and maybe be more transparent about what's going on, because you're going to run into cities, which you already have, Boston, Seattle, whatever, where they're going to try and keep the product out, and you're not helping yourself by how you're dealing with these situations. Be honest about what's going on. I'm sure the issue is not anything that's not solvable, but be more specific and open in talking about it. The other, the interesting thing about this is it was only a few weeks ago when again this debate surfaced about whether Tesla needs LiDAR or doesn't need LiDAR. And I forget who said it, but someone's like, well, what happens when the lights go out with the Tesla? And so the ultimate karma was this. The lights went out and the Teslas still operated, right? If you had your FSD. And by the way, that was always a ridiculous thing for someone to argue as it relates to LiDAR. I get that there's issues that people believe that LiDAR is a required thing. Maybe that is the case, but it's not because of the lights going out. The Tesla has headlights, right? They're powered in the headlights. That's when the lights go out, the headlights continue to work. I drive on highways where there's no street lamps. It works, quote unquote, works in the dark. But I think that was the ultimate karma, that when the lights went out in San Francisco, it was the Waymos that stopped and not the Teslas.
Bingo. And there's individuals say, well, this and this and this and that. Well, I'll give you two real life examples. When I was running 13.2.9 in an intersection in town, the lights were completely out. They were dead, very similar to San Francisco. The Tesla vehicle 13.2.9 treated as a stop sign, came to a complete stop and safely went on its way. Didn't run through it. And now I'm running 14.2.2.2. Yes, there's three twos there. And I went through an intersection the other day where a blinking red handles it perfectly. And I live in a situation where there's a lot of Secret Service activity. And I want to point out for the listeners, the Tesla with 14.2.2.2 handles Secret Service checkpoints and roadblocks no problem. It's really, truly amazing, to the point where I'm going to say, Walt, very publicly here, it's just a matter of time until they crack full self-driving and they validate that you don't need LiDAR.
Well, that was a lot of numbers, Grayson. And again, we'll see if they ultimately don't need LiDAR. And I think, the jury's still out until maybe we're 3-4 years down the road here, and we can really have enough statistics to see which of these solutions is performing better from a safety standpoint. So I think, I understand the argument that people make that use LiDAR in their stacks. So I think it'll take some time for us to truly understand, whether that, whether that makes a material difference. Clearly, it's not like the product is not functional. You and I both use this product. I don't know how many people, hundreds, let's call it thousands of people use this product every day. It's, I get enough situations where, the cameras have worked, functionally well. It's not like the product doesn't work. Now, does that mean it's going to be as safe as something with LiDAR? I don't know. Time will tell on that, and hopefully we'll get more stats. Let's go back to the remote operator thing, because again, I'm not sure many people understand this, but again, for any autonomy company, if there's an issue that the car faces, you think back to the times when I think it was the Waymo going in the circle, that car will ping back to a human who will tell the car what to do. They won't drive the car. Maybe in the case of Tesla, that's what happens right now, but that's not the end game in terms of what these remote drivers do. There is a ratio, for X number of Waymo cars, there are a certain number of remote drivers. What's the number? We have Chinese companies that we deal with that give us better disclosure in terms of what that ratio is of remote drivers to the cars that are out there. So here you had a specific example where they clearly didn't have enough remote safety drivers available in this scenario, as they wrote in that letter. So what is the ratio and what are your goals? And these are the types of things that I think, if you want to build, getting back to your point of public trust, that there needs to be more disclosure when you have situations like this. That it's just that simple.
And here's the other thing. This goes back years ago when I met with individuals from Homeland Security in DC, and there was a remote operations company. For privacy purposes, I'll omit them. And this remote operations company, who claimed they were the first to go driver out in California, was operating in a garage with the door open, and Homeland said, well, somebody can go in there with a gun and remotely take control of the vehicles. So security issues when you have remote operations. Where are the remote operators domiciled? Are they in Mountain View? Are they in the United States? Are they overseas? To me, it raises a lot of national security issues, especially what's happening in the world today with geopolitics. We need clarity on where these individuals are located. How are they trained? What is the security of those buildings? What are the restrictions around it? I remember years ago, Dr. Mark Rosekind, the former NITS administrator, hosted me at the Zooks headquarters, and he showed me how they built the remote operation for safety perspective, so somebody couldn't go rogue and drive it on a sidewalk or hit something. All the safety parameters, Waymo has to become more transparent there.
Just to be clear, like the remote drivers, when that is triggered for Waymo, is not a person with a steering wheel, right? They're getting an option that says like, okay, this car is in a situation it can't handle. Pick A or B, and that the remote person is literally just clicking a box saying, do this or do that, right? And so they're not like taking control of the car. The car is always the thing that's driving in the case of Waymo. I don't know if that's the case with Tesla. It's possible in Tesla right now, if they get stuck, there is a person with a steering wheel. That is not going to be the end game for Tesla as well. That's the way probably Waymo started in the earlier days. At some point, you evolve in terms of what that remote driver does. The bigger question here, though, Grayson, is, again, scale. Like there are 2,500 cars. That's not scale in the context of the number of cars that Uber has. But as you get more and more cars, like these are the things that happen. Like these remote cases are not the things that necessarily are going to cause the car to crash, but it's like, are you ready to take that up to 700, 800 cars? Like if is there an expansion area of remote drivers that'll happen when you have 10,000, a million cars on the road? Like what are those scale implications? So scale is not just about opening markets fast, which is what everyone wanted to define scale for in 2025. It might not even be about getting enough cars. It's can you service the hundreds of thousands of cars and deal with these situations, when they occur? This is all a part of scaling a product, which is obviously important. And this is nuts and bolts. These are different skill sets than someone figuring out how to get that car to operate autonomously, which is the engineers that are, have done such a great job at Waymo up to this point.
This raises the question, which I've raised in several issues of This Week in the Autonomy Economy newsletter, is why does Waymo not set up Waymo Operations LLC, bring the operations in-house? Because you can iterate faster and learn from this and bring in experienced operational people.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, this is like, Uber's got the same thing. You don't want to necessarily own, in this situation. Waymo doesn't want to own, they want to partner. But the problem is when you don't own and you're partnering all the time, it's your brand that's out there, right? It's your Waymo's cars that are parking in public curb spaces in between trips or like aggregating in someone's cul-de-sac. All the consumer's going to see is that Waymo brand, because whoever your partner was to service those cars hasn't been able to handle them and sent them somewhere else. I mean, these are real issues that come with, what is true scaling? Again, we had this debate, a month or two ago, like where everyone's, I got that argument with the guy on Twitter about like, oh, scaling is the fact that I can open markets faster. No, it's not. Scaling is about, can you operate hundreds, if not thousands of cars in a market efficiently? And that's not gonna upset the consumers and the politicians that are in that market. These are key issues that I think they have to deal with. So whether it's the PR on this or the execution of this, like these are real issues that Waymo is going to have to deal with as they continue to ramp cars. And like, look, every day we're getting closer and closer to when they, with Hyundai and perhaps other OEMs get to volume production, and you're not going to see like hundreds of incremental cars hitting the market every month. It's going to be thousands or tens of thousands. And like, you got to be prepared for that.
Well, let me ask you this question, and this is all publicly documented for the record. Who operates the remote drivers? Is it Waymo? Is it Move? Or is it Transdev? Or is it an unknown partner? I think that's something we'd like to get some clarity on.
Yeah, I have no idea. There's no transparency. I would hope that these are Waymo employees, right? But I have no idea. I don't really think, any of those. I think those companies that are doing the servicing are just charging, cleaning, maintaining. I don't think they're the ones doing the remote operation in these situations. But I don't know. All right, Grayson, let's shift topics off of Waymo and to Tesla. And, it is now 2026. Like I said, Happy New Year. Bottom line is they didn't really execute on their 2025 predictions, right? It was close, sure. Like there was a picture of a Tesla in Austin with no one in the driver or the passenger seat, right? But that is definitely not what anyone expected in terms of, well, anyone that believed that they were going to deliver on these results. Certainly there's a lot of negative people out there that didn't think that they would do it. But where they would be at the end of 25 in terms of cars with no safety attendant in the passenger seat. So how are you feeling about 2026 in terms of executing on that and increasing the number of cars in Austin?
I'm sticking with my 2026 prediction, and I still believe, and I'm sticking with this, that the driver out, safety and out will be in a limited ODD to start. So I'm sticking with the prediction, and anybody who follows Tesla knows they don't necessarily keep the timelines, but at the end of the day, they do truly execute.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it just, whatever. This one seemed like it was more immediate. It's not these these large, grandiose predictions of 1 million Robotaxi the following year, which were never really, at least for me, fully believable. This one was like more near term. Like you saw the ramp happening, you saw the markets. We're seeing what the software updates were like. Certainly, the more recent Tesla updates for our own FSD have been much better than when we were going through that 13 phase, where it was I thought very, very choppy. But I don't know. This is like, they were so close. I guess you could argue culture of safety and kind of not moving it forward. Like what changes in a week? Like, I don't know. When do you think, how much more time do you think it's going to take for them? Even if you believe that by middle of the year, they scale to a couple hundred in Austin, like how many more weeks until we even get like 10 cars in Austin taking rides with no drivers out? I don't even think, I haven't checked this, but have you seen any YouTubers out there posting videos? Like how many rides are they even doing right now in Austin?
We don't know. We don't have data on it. We have not seen a YouTube video of a Tesla influencer, nor have we seen a post on X or a mention on Reddit. We did have a video where a cat went in it, but a cat's not necessarily a human. I'll give you a prediction: commercial service, no safety attendant, no safety driver, complete full driverless, end of February, early March, and I will say sub 10 vehicles in a smaller ODD than the vastly available Robotaxi ODD today.
That's not good. In my view, that's not good. When we went from thinking that was going to happen towards the end of the year to now you're saying like end of Q1, pushing it back that far. I don't know. Again, not a company that you've got a lot of information. We just kind of ripped on Waymo for PR, but maybe someone from the company should provide more updates. Like, hey, it's end of the year. We acknowledge that we're not there. Here's kind of the latest update. I guess we can ask that on the upcoming earnings call and see what the update is there. But certainly, and I think there were supposed to be multiple markets as well. So let's push this out to end of the year. Let's forget about being too precise in terms of weeks and months. End of 2026. We already know what you think about Austin. Like, how many markets do you think have, let's call it, 50 cars operating, taking paying customers by the end of 26?
With safety attendant or no safety attendant?
No safety attendant.
I'm going to tell you a number that's going to upset our Tesla bulls. 2 to 3.
That's pretty bad though, right? If you believe that they can get Austin there, right? We know that this is like a true generalizable system. Why should it only be two or three markets? Like something doesn't fit there in terms of like how special. And look, I acknowledge, like, I think there is some specialization that should be required for a market. But when I drive from New York to Philly, right? Or, there was this video, or at least a claim someone went, which I'm a little skeptical about, coast to coast, this guy, David Moss, who's ironically a LiDAR salesman, and claims have no interventions. Like, if that's true, then it's like 2 to 3 markets. Like, that makes no sense, right? Because there's not a supply issue. There shouldn't be a local market issue. That makes no sense. So Tesla themselves, I think, is going to have to provide, and which they do, at most, I guess, on the earnings calls in terms of what's going on there. By the way, on the coast to coast thing, like in my experience in yesterday, New York to Philly and back, largely was great. My interventions were I was coming up to a toll booth and it was going to go in the cash only, and I'm not going to pay cash. And I think in Philly, like it's truly cash only. It's not like you can go through Easy Pass wherever you go. So I had to intervene. There was a situation where I was coming off the GW bridge and it was about to miss. It gets very confusing in terms of the lines. It was about to miss the lines. It was going to send me south as opposed to north, which would have been problematic. And then also when I had this trip, but it had a schedule and a recharge. It took me to a off the Jersey Turnpike, a Jersey recharge station, and went in and it started to park where there was 25 chargers there, maybe 15. I forget. It was a lot. Plenty of open spots. Drove right by them and then tried to back in where there was literally no charger. So like, how is it that this person went coast to coast and didn't have one random one-off thing? Like, again, those are not like deal breakers. Like these are small things that are clearly going to get fixed. But like, how did that person really go coast to coast where they had to have multiple charges and not one time have a situation like that? I'm a little, no offense to this person. I know the data has been analyzed, I suppose, but like, I'm just going to say I'm skeptical, given my own experience, which, by the way, has generally been positive. But those are the interventions that I've had.
In Jersey, are you able to charge your own car? Because you can't pump your own gas. Can you charge your own car?
You can, in fact, charge your charger. And by the way, the charging was super fast. It was great, right? And in terms of the powering. But like, getting back to the point, like, I don't know. There's still stuff to work out. I think you're setting a low bar for them. It doesn't logically make sense that it should only be a couple of markets, because what you're really saying, what you've described should have, if I'd asked you what you described for the end of 2026, if I had asked you this in February of 25, you would have said that would have been the case at the end of 25, I think, more or less, maybe give or take a quarter. So you're basically saying it's another year of delay in terms of getting the tech healthy enough to move forward.
It's not just the tech. You're harping on the tech. And to really go back to Mr. Moss's drive, it'd be great if we had time-lapse video like Holmar's blogs has released the whole video, but we don't have it. So there's really no way to truly to prove and verify that. Yes, we have data, but data can be fudged, as we all know. So I'm not saying that happened, but we'd really truly need more details and more data. It's not just technology, Walt. It's also the regulatory environment. And last night, down the road at Mar-a-Lago, Elon had dinner with Trump. And when I speak to individuals in policy world, they say certain individuals and certain organizations have gotten it all wrong. They said, oh, they're pushing for an act of Congress to get this through. That right now, there is really no path to pass a national autonomous vehicle framework through Congress. It's gridlocked. However, if the industry was smart enough, and maybe it's perhaps why Mr. Musk had dinner with President Trump last night, an executive order. Look what the president did with an AI executive order. Why don't we have an autonomous vehicle executive order? Mr. Musk has the political clout to get that through. And if there is an executive order legalizing autonomous vehicles in all 50 states, and there's a little thing, I'm sorry, state folks, preemption, that would allow that to go, then I might raise the bar 6 to 7.
That's a cop-out because, you said your prediction was specifically 2 to 3 markets, right? Or whatever it was. It was not lame in terms of you're lame, but it's a lame development, I think. I would characterize that for 26, excuse me. The regulatory environment does not limit you to 3 markets. It certainly hasn't limited Waymo to 3 markets. There are plenty of cities out there that you do not need national preemption of any sort for Waymo to hit, more markets than I think what you're predicting. So I don't. That's a cop-out. I think it is a technology issue. And again, to give them credit, focus on safety. We can feel the progress in driving it every day. But let's be honest, like it's, we would have hoped and liked and expected them to be further along at the end of 2026 than what you're laying out right now.
Oh, 100% we'd expect them to be further along. But you also have to remember.
And it's technology. That's not regulatory, though. That's my point. You can't blame the regulatory. That's technology.
It's a mixture of both.
All right, let's go back to Austin real quick. Because on the positive side, when I was getting all this Austin accident data, and it's been basically silent. I don't know. Has there been accidents in Austin? Maybe it's just that they're not doing any rides there. We have to go back to Austin and start to generate some rides for them, because maybe it's a lack of rides, or the accidents are down. But I think, Grayson, you're wearing your inspector hat, your Clouseau hat on, and I think you did over this past 2 weeks while I was in the sun. You were doing a little digging on the accident reports that did exist in Austin. And what did you find out?
First of all, I do have the Clouseau hat on. Thanks to Hugh at KPMG for sending it over. Hugh, this hat's for you, and this inspection report is for you. So going through the data is public. It's all unredacted. You could see names, addresses, incidents, and there was one particular name that stood out. I said, okay, so I read the police report complaint. I said, okay, very interesting. And then this report in the police filing linked to a YouTube video. A certain individual flew to Austin to try and get the vehicle to do something improperly and filmed it. And there was a chase vehicle chasing this around to film it. So Tesla has to deal with individuals like that will go out of their way and spend their own hard-earned dollars to try and derail a science project, essentially.
Right. So when I'm getting quoted these stats where it's like miles driven, accidents per mile driven, complaints, whatever it is, in part it's by people that are proactively, padding the stats, who already have, obviously some view on Tesla. I don't know. Maybe there's a similar people that do that for Waymo. Maybe these companies themselves hire people to file, but that's like, it just puts some of these stats in general. And it gets back to what I was saying earlier in the podcast, in terms of like, it may take several years for us to really know the relative safety performance, of these companies, rather than maybe relying on these very low end, meaning not sample size, reports that we're getting up to this point. So good work on that. Whatever. I wonder if that person actually proactively tells people in their social media channels, what they're doing in this market to file additional complaints. But whatever. Let's go on to Uber, because I like to listen to podcasts, especially when on vacation. I think I heard Dara, CEO of Uber, on some podcasts. The Uber narrative is very clear right now, which is, hey, not only are we diversified, but it's going to take a long, long time for these companies to scale. And like on this podcast, I was hearing him start saying 20 to 30 years to scale. And then I have to go back. I'm not going to say this is 100% true. I'm pretty sure he said at one point, 50 years for autonomy to scale. Whether it's 50, 20, or 30, like, it's kind of getting a little crazy right now in terms of Uber claiming that it's going to take that long, notwithstanding everything we just said about Tesla, right? And your softer prediction for this year, or the fact that Waymo, is probably only going to, add a couple of thousand this year. Like, at some point you do get to production, and it doesn't take 20 or 30 years to do that. I don't you look at any technology curve, I don't understand where they're coming up with these numbers. What's your thought?
The messaging from Uber has clearly changed, and Uber has leaned into the Risher, as in the CEO of Lyft messaging, where Mr. Risher has for a very long time now, I would say at least the past 6 months, has been talking about, quote unquote, the benefits of hybrid networks. And then Andrew McDonald, COO, is out there talking about hybrid networks. Dara's out there talking about hybrid networks. They're trying to blunt the narrative. This is my humble opinion, trying to blunt the narrative that robotaxis are going to essentially eat their lunch. And remember, before, it was all about demand aggregation. You need the Uber platform to generate demand aggregation. Now it's hybrid networks. And as you said from those podcasts, now it's going to take a long time to scale. It's not going to take 50 years for autonomy to scale, point blank. Within 10 years, autonomy is going to be massive, massive, massive. And in some cities outside of San Francisco, it's going to become very commonplace.
I mean, so maybe it was Risher that said the 50 years. I don't know. And maybe I'm imagining the 50 years, but these guys are talking decades, right? And it just doesn't, think about it. It doesn't logically make sense. We've seen some of the build plans, from some of these tech companies. Things take time, but they don't take 20 years time, right? You're going to hit inline scaling. And again, okay, what's your target in the US? 2 million cars? Do you really need 2 million cars when these autonomous cars are going to be on the road at all time? I get your arguments on hybrid and the Calcanus argument in terms of like why not plug it into the numerous networks. But I just don't understand this. Like the numbers are the numbers. Like you can just do the basic math and trying to predict the number of cars that are going to be on the road in 5 years, not 20 or 30, and see the type of share impact that has. So I don't know. It's amusing. I'm going to keep these. You know, these are the receipts we'll keep when 20 or 30 if we're still around. I don't think we're going to need wait 20 or 30 before we pull some of these quotes back in not too distant future. What else do we have going on in the autonomy world this week or these past 2 weeks, Grayson?
This one is fun. Some people might call it creepy and scary, but I call it fun. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Department has deployed an autonomous patrol vehicle. That's right, an autonomous patrol vehicle. Right today, there is a safety driver, and this is from the Sheriff's Department, an official release from Sheriff's Department. They want to transition to fully autonomous driver out where it patrols neighborhoods because the sheriff said it can help lower crime and build trust with the community. Both things I fully agree with, and I fully support the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Department for deploying autonomous vehicles into their fleet. And another thing that the sheriff came out and said, they have an unfortunate lack of police officers. So autonomy is filling in a void where it's needed.
We support the police here on Autonomy Markets, and we hope that they can attract. I get why it's tough to be a policeman right now, given what they've had to deal with in recent years. And obviously, we want to hire as many law enforcement as is appropriate for these cities. But look, at the end of the day, like there's plenty of times I've been on highways and you see a parked police car, right, with no one in it that you slow down for, right? Or in New York when they have these shows of force. When Bloomberg was in office, where they just have, when you see police on the street, it obviously discourages perhaps crime. So if this is one way to do it, where they have a police car roaming around, where it's the at least the vision of presence, and look, these things will have cameras, so that as they see things, they can report back and send officers. We already have that in terms of cameras that are on the street. Motorola Solutions, a company that I've dealt with, sells a lot of this into local police forces and communities. So, it makes sense that they would do that. And obviously, government is a good source of product for some of these other technology companies that are out there beyond Waymo and Tesla that we'd obviously like to succeed. Do we any idea Miami-Dade, like who they're using in the tech stack here?
It is a company that specializes in making autonomous vehicles for police. So it's a specialized police company dedicated to autonomy. And that's their entire business. I believe, and I'll have to fact check this, that was founded by ex-officers.
Got it. What about the foreign autonomy desk, Grayson? Anything happening overseas?
Things continue to get interesting overseas. We've talked about it for months now, with London becoming a hotbed of autonomy. And then it's seemingly within mere hours of one another. And I know this was announced previously. Uber announced that they are going to launch the Baidu RT6 in London. And then seemingly an hour later, David Risher, CEO of Lyft, comes out with a post. But I want to caveat that Lyft previously announced that I believe it was a month ago that they were going to London. They're going to deploy Chinese-made autonomous vehicles in London. Walt, this reminds me a lot of, I know I'm going to say the name wrong, Huawei situation.
It's Huawei. Look, the bigger issue here is, since the whole tariff hubbub in early 25, there has been a lot of dialogue about the relationship U.S. and China, but if you kind of follow the tea leaves, what's happening in energy, otherwise, like that hasn't really gone away, right? And there is still risk, frankly, getting back to your unforced error using Waymo, using Zeekr. There's still risk of additional trade issues that are back and forth. Obviously, our relationship with Europe is complex depending on the country, but again, to your point, like we'll see how things evolve in 2026 because the world is a big place and, kind of alliances shift back and forth. And, how much some of these Chinese vehicles and technology are going to continue to be embraced in Europe going forward. And frankly, what repercussions, if ever, happens in the US in terms of the ability to sell Chinese EVs, even direct to consumers, or let alone through, companies like Waymo. I mean, there was another podcast I was listening to. I think it was a Bloomberg podcast where someone was arguing that maybe even if Chinese EVs continue to be banned, there's kind of a carve out and to allow autonomous companies to use it because it's part of an own fleet and there's some control there. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on? You've been kind of a China hawk in 25. How do you think this kind of plays out in 26?
It all changed yesterday morning when the United States went in and took out the president, or you want to call it the leader of Venezuela, because China imports 76% of their oil. That's right. They import 76% of their oil. It comes from three major countries: Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. So we see the geopolitical issues with Russia. We see the uprising in Tehran, where Trump has threatened to send in boots on the ground if they do hurt people. And then you have Venezuela, where the president came out and basically said that we've now controlled the oil. And then the interesting part about Venezuela and China is that oil was subsidized. It's heavy crude, so you have to refine it, which China has world-renowned refining things. They're getting it for $8 to $12 a barrel, subsidized by the Venezuelan government. Another interesting caveat: Beijing had a delegation in Venezuela meeting with Maduro hours before the United States went and took him out. So China's not happy. They've issued statements there. So you have that issue. So that whole geopolitical China, and that's going to put pressure on China to stop the invasion of Taiwan, which they talked about in their New Year's Day address, which the U.S. has active forces over there to study the aircraft carriers. And then furthermore, on May 7th, 2026, you have an election in the UK. You can get a Conservative Party majority and get a Conservative Prime Minister who is a China hawk, which will effectively could ban Chinese vehicles in the United Kingdom. This goes back to an argument that I've made many times this week in the Autonomy Economy newsletter, is that they need economists and political strategists on these teams to look at all these potential risks of what could possibly happen before cutting these deals.
I mean, if things get nasty, do you think that the Trump administration like goes to, a California-based company in Uber and says like, look, we don't want you, and whatever influence they have, using any whether it's the U.S. or not, as a U.S. company, we don't want you partnering with any Chinese technology companies in any of these markets. Can it get that severe?
I think that's where it's going. I think it's a matter of time. And I do think that when that happens, that Uber and Lyft are going to have a European UK reset as all their deals that they're looking to deploy China and the UAE reset.
I mean, the counter argument is like, I don't know what authority that they have, but I think what the Trump administration has shown is that, there are obviously situations where maybe you don't necessarily have the authority, but you definitely have the influence ability in a variety of ways to shape how these companies are going to, deal with these, even in markets outside of the U.S. So we'll see. So you're remaining the China hawk. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but we'll see how things play out. I mean, look, what's happened recently when Tesla reported their numbers were down, and obviously you have who was it, BY or someone overtake them in terms of number of EVs sold. I saw a couple of them when I was traveling. Great cars, right? So they are putting what appears to be high quality cars on the market. It's just whether we want to subject ourselves in Western markets to that technology.
But they are putting high quality cars on the road. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, has raved about his Xiaomi vehicle, but those vehicles are subsidized. China's economy is in fundamental trouble now that the oil's cut off. They're going to have to turn on the printing press.
The U.S. market was subsidized as well until very recently, right? You did get tax breaks for these cars, so that's a subsidy in a different way, but I hear you. I mean, I think, look, the bigger issue is I was reading this book during Obama's first term and some of the technological things, and obviously we're all well aware of what Israel has done with pagers. It's, the technology that can be embedded in products, whether it's us or others, certainly exists and provides a reason or at least a cover for whatever the true reason is for why the government would want to restrict it, whether it's trade or otherwise. Some of the concerns, you cited Huawei, and that was the primary driver of why they ripped out Huawei equipment out of all the U.S. cellular networks.
And UK, let's not forget.
Yep. All right, what else do we have on the Foreign Autonomy desk?
We Ride and Grab got approval from Singapore to launch testing in the Punggol region. So Singapore continues to evolve as an autonomous vehicle hub. A prediction for 26, you will see multiple companies deploy fully commercial driver-out vehicles in Singapore. Singapore looks to regain their status as a world leader in deployments of autonomous vehicles. Singapore was there in the beginning with Nutonomy, which was acquired by Aptiv and later became Motional. So Singapore is looking to reclaim that crown.
I was just in Singapore. I didn't notice any autonomous vehicles. I was in Bangkok as well. You think the tuk-tuks will ever go autonomous?
You never know. Anything is possible.
All right, what else do we have?
Staying in that part of the world, going back to China, ZYT, which was spun out of DJI, the Chinese drone manufacturer. ZYT, for our audience doesn't know, has been focused on making autonomous vehicle technology on the mainland of China. They put out a press release that they're expanding into autonomous trucking. They said that they are getting a deal with a large Chinese OEM. No disclosure. However, that company is 33% owned by the Chinese state. So things are interesting.
So we're very Chinese heavy in the foreign autonomy markets this week. I like it.
That was this week. Next week is CES. I'll be there. You'll be there. What do we need to look for? I know that there's news coming from Motional, but what else do we need to look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mobileye has some big announcement plan, or at least some presentation. Who knows what they're going to say? For us, it's just getting more specific updates on what's going on with a lot of these companies. I mean, sometimes there's large announcements. I'm going to try and get into a Zoox, I think, while we're there. Are they operating there still? I think on those set routes. It's CES is always very productive on the media side and on the SpaceX side of things, as well as obviously autonomy on the West Hall. So for those of you listening to this podcast on your way out there, because we had a little bit of a late dropping of the podcast this week, have safe travels, and let us know, because we'll be very active over the next couple of days there.
Yeah, have a safe journey to Las Vegas. Walt and I will be there. If you see us, come up and say hi, and perhaps Walt and I will record a little content that we can put in next week's Autonomy Markets. See you in Vegas. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is global autonomy scaling. Walt, until next week.